Hello, guys, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach, mates. Well, for Thomas and I, our commitments at the Australian Open have finished for another year, so it means that we're back with the podcast. Well, I am anyway. So tonight, what we're going to do, we're just going to very quickly go through some of the higher ruckmans and perhaps a few smokies, and we're going to get both. So we've got both Thomas and Jonas here tonight. And we're just going to give our verdicts on perhaps who we should pick out of the choice of ruckmans and why. So this will work very similar to the other one. So basically there'll be two ruckmen on the screen, and we're just going to give our verdict on which one we should pick and why. So starting off with the first one, which is this one here. So we've got Max Gawn and Jared Witts. So the two highest priced ruckmen. So Gawn at 622k and Witts at 605k. I'll throw this to you, Thomas. If you had to pick between the two of these, who would you pick and why?
I don't really have both at the moment currently, but if I had to pick one, it'd probably be Gawn, just purely based on the fact that as an owner of Witts last season, I missed the initial good scoring he had, and I kind of jumped on the hype train and suffered because of it. He obviously did have his consistent scoring, no doubt, but when I was watching my fair share of Gold Coast games, he was kind of, losing the hit not losing the hit outs, when he wasn't getting those hit outs to advantage as consistently as he does. He doesn't do much around the ground, and that kind of impacts his scoring, and it's kind of, he gets stuck on a 90 and then trying to lose his way to just clip over 100. It gets quite frustrating as an owner, whereas Gawn, as soon as he goes forward, he's a pretty big threat as well. He can really tear open games apart. Obviously not as dominant as what he used to, and I guess we don't know exactly what the ruck split will be between him and Grundy, but there is that risk there. I have a feeling they'll play Gawn more forward to start off with, and then kind of, ruck obviously forward of centre, and then obviously swap him when Grundy needs a rest, which is obviously very potent for Melbourne, but not so much for super coaches. But I think, if you wanted to pick one, probably Gawn, but they're both still probably too high with the amount of rucks we have, as you'll see in the upcoming slide. We've got a fair few to choose from that are pretty valid, and I think, if anything, I'd be happy to give these two a miss this season in particular.
Are you the same, Jonas?
Yeah, as for starting them, I share a similar point of view, but if I had to pick one, I'd be looking towards Witts, just because he's got sole ruck responsibility at Gold Coast. There's no one challenging him there. His scoring was pretty consistent up until the back end of the year, but in saying that, he's also shown across last year that his durability is pretty solid. Gawn had a few setbacks last year and had one pretty recently with a hamstring injury, so that sort of scares me off a bit. And I think he's a better, more versatile ruckman than Grundy, in the sense that he can play forward and back, which might mean he's spending less time in the ruck compared to Grundy. And if you're paying 622k for a guy who's playing full back and full forward for like stints in the game, I just can't see that being a valid pick. So I'd be leaning towards Witts, and I think he's one who could potentially score the most total points out of all ruckmen, but you're still paying a pretty premium price. So I also reckon there's better value options that you can use and then save that money and sort of distribute it over other lines. How about you, Nathan? What do you reckon?
Yeah, so I'm the same. So I haven't got either of these two. I think for Gawn, I think the Grundy question mark is very valid. And I think for Gawn, I think even though he's of quite a potent forward, I still think he got a lot of his points from ruck work last year. And as for Jared Witts, I still can't believe that he's in the top two ruckmen for this year, given the fact that he used to play at Collingwood and he was an absolute sputtered Collingwood. And ever since he's gone up to Gold Coast, he's become this tap ruckman that I think Collingwood fans would have wanted to see when he was there. So, if I had to pick between the two, I think I would go with your side, Jonas, only because I think the Grundy question mark with Gawn would scare me off a bit. So moving on to the next one. which is this one here. So we've got Tim English and Sean Darcy. So Tim English 581k and Sean Darcy 562k. I think both of these guys, personally myself, are probably the value picks, but I'd be interested to see what you guys think. So Jonas, I'll throw this one over to you to start off with. Who are you picking out of these two and why?
In a ironic sense, I feel like these two similar to when you're comparing against Gawn and Witts, in the sense that Darcy's like Gawn with Jackson coming in, and Witts has sole reign of the ruck line at the Dogs. So it would be a bit ironic for me to then suggest Darcy with Jackson coming in. So I'd have to go English. The only issue with English is his durability is very poor. I think he had a tight abductor quite recently. Last year, all the head knocks kept him out. So I think the Bulldogs will continuously take a conservative approach with him, which could mean he gets subbed out or he misses 2 to 3 weeks with head knocks throughout the year. But in saying that, Darcy's durability is almost just as bad. He just has the ability to play through it. But the fact that Jackson's coming in, I feel like it will definitely eat a bit into Darcy's ruck time. So I can see Darcy's average not being that good. And whilst he will keep that ceiling, you might be able to get him at cheaper price at points of the year, purely because he might spend one game just playing predominantly forward. And English has the ability to get on hot runs. So I feel like English is definitely one that you should be considering, purely because he's got no real competition. I think Steph Martin's gone. Correct me if
he has. Yep.
So I don't think Jordan Sweet will be playing too regularly. And English through the preseason has been doing really well up until this slight niggle, which has sort of just reminded me about how bad his durability is. But in saying that, the fact that he can go on runs like he did at the start of last year, and if you don't own him, you're so far behind. Whereas Darcy will always be limited by Jackson a bit.
Yep, I would probably go along with that. Just off the top, Thomas, are you in agreement with Jonas there?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, even with Darcy playing, more ruck percentage than what we might expect with the split with Jackson, I think found out last year. I think Jonas found out pretty quickly that his scoring's not as good as what it used to be when he picked him up last season. But I think, English, I've got a bit of PTSD from owning him last year when he was injured in and out with concussions and stuff. And as Jonas said, with that adductor injury, just timely reminder that he's not invincible and he's very prone to injuries. Having said that, I think there was that Steph Martin concern last season, and now it's pretty much non-existent. And as Jonas said, I don't think Sweet will do much damage. And, the more that English develops, the better he'll get. Obviously, he's not known for his tap ruck when he's similar in a Ryan Marshall sense that he's dominant around the ground. And that's where he picks up most of his points. It's just he's lacking that consistency at the moment. We obviously know his ceiling is very, very good. Got that 160, but his floor is also quite poor. So I think if he was a little bit cheaper, like that Grundy price, I'd be very tempted to kind of lock and set and forget with him. But I'm tossing up, I don't have him currently just because of cash to move around, but it's quite easily gettable. So he could quite come in and set my team for a while. But he's one of those things that, as Jenna said, I think if you miss out, there's not many ruckmen going around, considering the other one's Marshall with regards to the ability to dominate across the ground. I think he's one that you probably can't miss on if it's too late. So, and he's one that I guess if you miss out early and then he gets concussed, then you kind of completely waste a trade because you brought him in too late. So it's one of those things where I probably suffered early on because I missed out on all these good scores and jumped on, and then he got injured after that. So I think if you want to jump on round one and reap the benefits early on for sure.
Yeah, we've got the trades to do so. And also, I don't think Lob will really affect him too much either, because he purely moved away from Fremantle to to play primarily forward and avoid getting time in the ruck. So I don't think Bevo, at least he shouldn't be putting him in the ruck too often and English up forward.
Yeah, so, well, I currently have Tim English in my side, so I think that's enough said for me on this. I'm hoping he can go big, although I'm a little bit concerned about his start. I think the Bulldogs have a tough start, in particular in the ruck department. I think they've got
First up.
Melbourne first up, so that's Grundy and Gawn, and I don't think their second match is any easier in the ruck. I wish I had that off the top of my head, but I don't. But yeah, Tim English is currently my side, so I think that's all I'm gonna sort of say on that one. So moving on to the next one. Oh, let's do these ones first, and then we'll move on to them next. So Rowan Marshall and Brodie Grundy. So obviously Rowan Marshall 506k. I think he's good value. Brodie Grundy 512k. But because he got injured, he got a discount on his price, so that's why he's at that price despite averaging 103. Thomas, where are you leaning towards this one?
Marshall all day. He's, unless I see otherwise that he's playing tandem ruck with either Campbell or, only if it's Campbell, I'd be a little bit concerned. But I think he had an interview with Channel 7 recently, and he said he was, fit and firing. He's leaner than ever. He's fitter than ever, and he's ready to take on that number one ruck role. I think now he's realised the kind of gap he has to fill, the gaping hole he has to fill with Paddy Ryder gone, and I think he knows that responsibility now. And he'd be up there in the senior statesman category now with all that tall forwards basically dissipated. I did see some training footage that Saints TV post on Instagram and Twitter, and it seems like they're really trying to push that narrative of putting Cooper Sharman up forward. Even Max Heath is doing a lot of goal kicking up forward. So I think they really want to avoid having Marshall as a key target up forward and really utilising him in the ruck. Because I think if he's fit and firing in the ruck, he just adds another dynamic to our midfield that we don't normally get when he's not there, because he basically adds as another midfielder. He's, not necessarily known for his tap work, and he'll improve on that as he gets older. But I think one thing is really dominant is just how he runs his opponent through the ground and can really spread them aerobically, similar to a Mark Blitzarves. And I think if we can kind of just make sure we've got that forward line structure sorted by round one, we'll see Royal Marshall first up against Freo, which is a tough ask, I think, against obviously Darcy and Jackson. And Jackson's the one that I think will go head-to-head with him for most of the game because he can cover him across the ground. But I think, if anything, I think this is Marshall's year to shine and really show why his nickname is the Prospect and really why he's why St Kilda are so keen on him and sign him on that 5-year deal. Yeah, so, I mean, Grundy's not a bad pick as well. As I said in an earlier podcast, I do think I was talking to a mate of mine who's a Melbourne supporter, and he thinks he's going to play major stints in the ruck. But, if you had to pick between the two, there's more of a safety bet that Marshall plays more in the centre than the Grundy swapping in and out with Gawn for sure.
Yep. Are you the same, Jonas? Yeah, I actually have warmed a bit to the Grundy pick because, I mean, looking at that average already, his average was all right given the price he's at. And I think he will be playing a fair bit of ruck time and hitting down to some of the best mids in the game. And he's shown now that he's actually somewhat injury prone as well. So imagine if you start with Grundy, he plays a bit forward, he gets the DPP, and then Gawn gets injured. Then you're flying. So it's not a bad pick, but it's also pretty risky because it can go pretty south in the sense that Grundy might just get 50% of the ruck and average like 90, and then you're sort of stuck with him. Whereas Marshall has that real upside. So because of that reason, you almost have to look toward Marshall. But yeah, what about you, Nathan? Do you see any universe in which you pick Grundy?
A narrow one. A very, very narrow one, and that is, I think the only way I'd pick Grundy is if Gawn does a major injury in the preseason, and he's ruled out for the majority of the year. I could really see Grundy taking advantage of that, but look, I think it's hard to look past Ryan Marshall. I actually think Marshall will end up as the number one ruckman at the end of the year. I'm just putting it out there. I think this is his year to shine. I think most of his high scores last year came when Ryder wasn't in the side, and now that Ryder's permanently not in the side, I think his scoring is going to really flourish, and I think St Kilda have a good sort of centre clearance group around him, which I think is vital for these types of ruckmen. So yeah, I think this is Marshall's year, to be honest. I think this is where he takes the next step and elevates himself up into the Gawn and Darcy's and Whitsons of the ruck world on fantasy games. But anyway,
I think just whilst Nathan switching slides, for my 2 cents, I think I've got both in the side at the moment, so I guess that's where I see both of them. But I think if you're tossing up between, all these uniques and differentials aside, if you're tossing up between, say, someone like a Grundy and an English, I think, as Jonah said, Grundy could blow up and play predominantly ruck and really dominate that centre clearance. And as he said, you tap into Oliver and Petrarca, so you're pretty much guaranteed to get points on board if you're tapping anywhere near their vicinity. But because they're playing against each other round one, it's almost worth the risk hypothetically, because I don't think, if you pit them together, unless Grundy gets injured or ends up playing predominantly forward, they're going to negate each other anyway. I don't think English all of a sudden scores 160 against a Grundy and Gawn, with the fact that, Melbourne will know that what English is capable of. So, they'll be tag teaming pretty effectively trying to negate that. But yeah, as I said, I reckon you can't go wrong with either. There's obviously more risk laced with Gawn, with the fact that it could go south very quickly if he gets injured or if the injury flares up again, and obviously with the Gawn factor. But yeah, it's one of those things that I guess we've just got to wait until the pre-season or closer to round one to see what happens.
Yeah, and I guess just before we move on to these two, I guess the other thing with Grundy was Collingwood probably didn't have the greatest centre clearance group when Grundy was there, and he was still basically a top two ruckman. So now that he has the best midfield group there is upside there. But yeah, I think Marshall's probably the safer one out of those two. So moving on to our unique picks. So these guys, I believe both of these guys are currently in about 1% of side. So we've got Mark Blicavs here, who's 537k. In fact, they're both 537k. Both have the same average. I'm personally steering clear of both of these guys, but Jonas, if you had to pick one, who would it be?
I definitely could never pick Natanui again, because A, he's playing for West Coast, B, he is injury prone, C, with the sub rule coming on, I can easily see him getting subbed off in like the third or fourth quarter, purely because they don't need him. They're not really going to be that competitive, so I don't think wins and losses will be as important to them as it would be to develop some of the younger ruckmen like Jamison. I think they've got a few others in there. So on top of that, he is, getting there with age. So I don't think you could start with Natanui, unfortunately. And Blicavs is an interesting one. He's a unique. He's got the ruck midfield swing, but I'm not sure how useful that is, because who are you going to swing him with? But in saying that, he was pretty good last year. And as you can see, their highest score of 135. But he does have the tendency to fluctuate in scoring a bit, purely because of his role. And for that reason, I don't think you can start him, because Chris Scott can put him anywhere and he can score 60. Not because he's had a bad game, just because he's played in a funny position, like on the wing or something like that, or a full back. And they've got Stanley and stuff in there. So, yeah, I'd be picking Blicavs if I had to pick one, but ideally I'd be picking neither.
Yeah. Are you the same, Thomas?
Yeah, I mean, to keep it nice and short, I wouldn't be picking either. There's, I think, too much risk attached to both. Not so much with Blitzards. I mean, Blitzards not getting any younger, and Chris Scott has a tendency to rest these senior statesmen towards the back end of the season, which doesn't help. Blitzards is one that surprised me a little bit with his consistency. He was one that I was almost considering picking later on in that season last year, but we nicked that. He's one that if I was ballsy, one you could be almost wanting to pick because of how capable he is to score ridiculous scores. The man, like when he gets on three quarters, he's already at a ton when he's playing his full fitness, but he's just never fit, which is the issue. And West Coast aren't what they used to be. Even with the likes of Dom Shagio and Shui kind of all coming back into training, and obviously West Coast were a basket case last year, and who knows what happens this year, but I think there's just too much risk attached with him. And when you've got the likes of Marshall and Grundy both cheaper than Nat Nui and Blitzarves, I don't think you'd be wanting to pick him. I'd rather go and pick both of Marshall and Grundy ahead of these two for sure.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm the same. I've loved Nick Nat, love what he can do, but yeah, he's never on the park. And Blitzarves, yeah, I guess he's a bit of a Mr. Fix-It. I mean, there were stages last year where he was their number one ruck. There were stages where he was sent to tag Melbourne's key midfielders, which for someone like that, I don't think you would be picking him at that price at 540k and be seeing him running out next to Oliver Petrarca and told to shut them down. So, yeah, I think steer clear of both of these guys if you can. So moving on. Oh, no, I didn't mean to do that. What have I done there? Oh, have I closed them all? That's fun.
Cut the PowerPoint short, had enough.
Yeah, I have. No, that's fine. We've got a couple more here. So moving on. So we've got two more left. So we've got our DPP ruck forward. So we've got Luke Jackson and Darcy Cameron, who are both 465k. Both have pretty much the same averages. Who are you leaning towards here, Thomas? Because I think Jonas might have a biased answer here. Who are you leaning towards here, Thomas, and why?
Probably Darcy Cameron. I think Jackson, it's not like he's going to a club where he's the number one ruck. If he was, then 100% you pick him in the forward line. I think just with his aerobic capabilities and then him with the confirmation playing number one ruck, you know, he's playing at Freo with Darcy. Whilst he may get a lot of ruck position, I can't see Darcy playing forward too many times. I think they would almost like Jackson up forward for stints of the game because, yeah, as I said, as you guys mentioned, Roy Lobb's obviously not at the club anymore, so Jackson's a better version of Lobb in the fact that he's more aerobically gifted and he's more dominant around the ground. So I think with him, he's just a kind of a void for me at this stage unless he shows otherwise. Darcy Cameron, I had initially, but then liked the idea of having, you know, Grundy, English, and Marshall, one of those two combinations in the side, and then Darcy Cameron potentially forward, but I just can't fit it with the cash at the moment unless I downgrade elsewhere. Obviously, out of that injury, Nigel popping up pre-season, but we all know what he's capable of last season when obviously Grundy was injured and he came into number one ruck. He pretty much scored mostly tons. Petered off quite significantly at the end of the season. And who knows what happens with Mason Cox if he does play a tandem role more often or if they stick with Cameron more consistently moving forward. But it'd be interesting to see what you guys think, obviously, as being Collingwood supporters. What are your thoughts on Cameron, obviously being predominantly number one ruck this season?
Yeah, well, I'll throw to you, Jonas, first. Are you going to take Cameron?
At the moment, he's in my side, but as the preseason wears on, and some of the cases mount for other rucks, it's getting harder to keep him. The only really advantage of starting Cameron, apart from his DPP, is that he's priced like 50k cheaper than Marshall or 40k cheaper, and I think he is a clear ruck one at Collingwood. Whilst Mason Cox did spend stints in the ruck line, his time on ground was very low, and he's only getting a year older. And Cameron, around the ground, he's really solid. Like, he takes big contested marks. And obviously his rock work, whilst it might not be as good as Cox in the sense that he's not as tall, he covers the ground much better. He's got a better tank. And so I think he's actually a very, very viable selection, given he's got some of those forward scores pre-Grundy's injury priced into him. So for me, I like the pick a fair bit. I just am curious to see how much time Cox gets, because we've got McStay. I don't see much benefit in running Cox, Cameron, and McStay in there for 100% of the game. So maybe Cox is playing a bit, but he's not playing nearly as much time on ground as the other two. So I'm not that concerned about Cox, to be honest, because the way Collingwood play doesn't really lend to having those three tall players in the team at once. So for me, I can easily see him bumping that average to about 100 and being a fairly decent pick. And as for Jackson, he's going to spend too much time up forward, you'd think. So he's a no for me. But either of these two in your team at the moment?
Yeah, well, I have Darcy Cameron in the forward line at the minute. So I've taken advantage of that ruck forward swing. And to be honest, I think Mason Cox this year is going to be a non-factor. As Jonas alluded to, the fact that Collingwood are playing this sort of fast, chaotic football, I don't think it suits Mason Cox. I think McStay's clearly going to be in the forward line with Brody Myercheck. So I think he'll pinch hit a bit McStay in the ruck, but I think it's largely going to be Darcy Cameron. And I think his scoring tapered off when Mason Cox sort of started to get going in the back half of the year a bit. So I think with the year that he had last year when he was basically solo, I think that average of 84 can really climb. And as Jones said, he could nudge 100. I'm not quite sure he gets to that, but if he could even get to, high 90s, I'd be happy with that. And yeah, as for Jackson, I still think there's too much question marks about his role at Fremantle and what it looks like, because I think if we cast back to that grand final, I think he got a lot of his points as a ruckman after they swung Gawn into the forward line. So I'm not quite sure if Darcy has the same forward craft as Max Gawn. So I'm not convinced that Jackson can keep that average up as a forward. And even if he has to go in the ruck, I'm not sure if Sean Darcy can do the same job as what Max Gawn did. So, yeah, I think for Jackson, his average might climb to 90, but yeah, I think Darcy Cameron's probably the safer pick out of those two. And moving on, we've got one more here. So we've got I've just lost the screen share. All right, there we go. Right, so we've got Sam Draper, who's 398,000, and Ned Reeves, who's 356k. We're also going to throw. So someone sent us a message on one of our social media platforms about Scott Lycett, who's 429k, with an average of 86.8. So we're going to throw him in sort of at the end of this as well. But both of these guys, I think, will probably be number one rucks. Maybe there's a question mark over Reeves, but me personally, just before you two go on, I'm just going to be short and sharp here. I never pick a mid-pricer in the ruck at the start of the year, so these are both hard passes for me. Thomas, where are you going?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously Draper every year gets touted as a breakout ruckman, and obviously he's developed hugely from when he started. I think he has the potential to continue his development, but I think he's just going to struggle to do it consistently on a consistent enough basis to make enough money for you. I think at 398k, he's almost at 400, so it makes it an awkward price. If he was maybe 100k cheaper, who knows? Reeves is one that has a lot of potential. Obviously, there's Max Lynch to worry about in regards to that number one ruck spot, and I think Reeves is probably a slight favourite to take that. I think just with Reeves, he's still developing as a ruckman himself, and he just gets outbeat in most games. I think his ceiling is not high enough. And as you probably put it quite promptly, Nathan, I think picking these two is quite risky. It obviously saves you a fair bit of cash to redistribute elsewhere. But having said that, I'd almost go down to another rookie-based price if they're only available. But I'd probably stay clear of both. If I had to pick between two of them, I might just have to go with Draper, just because he's quite fun to watch, but also because he's got that potential to blow up in a game, I think, at some point with his size and dominance in the air as well. Adding to what those two players with regards to Lysette, I think we obviously were speaking off air before the podcast, and Jonas mentioned he was tinkering with him in his side, and I'll let him speak more about Lysette. But he's an interesting one because if he maintains that number one ruck role for Port, he can score quite well, and he's only 30k more expensive than Draper. But I think there's just too much history of. He's obviously not young, so he's always a big concern about short, small niggles here and there. But he's also one that can get quite fired up and get himself booked by the MRO. So he's one that I think could be quite good just because of his lowered price, but I don't think it's enough to justify, saving that 80k from a Grundy, for example, or 100k from English to kind of see if he can go a bit different. And I think there's just too much risk involved. So I'd probably say out of the three, Draper, just because I think there's a lot more upside to him, and he showed in glimpses in last season what he's capable of, and he can definitely tear open a game and almost, as I think that photo there in the PowerPoint is from him scoring that ridiculous goal off the centre square bounce. So he's one that I think, I would pick out of the three, but as I said, I think there's just too much risk involved in all of them. But what are your thoughts, Jonas? Obviously, you're the one that had Lysette in for a little bit. Maybe elaborate a bit on that and explain your reasoning behind that one, because it's definitely a bit different.
Yeah, I only like the Lysette pick because he has that scoring history and potentially the Port Adelaide ruck spot sewn up. But in saying that, Finlayson did pretty well last year, and Lysette is somewhat injury prone, so it's a bit hard to start him because at that price, you're almost picking him as a keeper, and I don't think he'll see the season out. He'll have games potentially where, as you're saying, he gets suspended or injured or something. So it's one I toyed with momentarily, but yeah, I don't think I can start him. As for Draper, he scored 6 in a full game. That concerns me a lot because the way he plays is very reckless. He gives away free kicks, and whilst he's developed a lot, I just don't think his game is very SuperCoach friendly at all because he does a lot of things that lose him points. And I don't think you can start Reeves either because they got Lynch in there, who I don't think is as big of a threat, but Lloyd Meek has also come across, who I think and so because of that, Reeves is a definite no-go because unless Meek gets injured or Reeves is seen to have the full-time ruck at Hawthorn, I don't think he'll be scoring very well. And if I had to select one purely through process of elimination, it would be Draper. But as you're saying, you're better off just paying another 100,000 and getting Marshall, and just worry about it.
What's Meek price at this year?
Meek's price at around 450.
It's 431.
I was gonna say if he's 100k cheap, you'd almost go him as an R2 almost, because he's definitely capable and he scores actually quite well when he was replacing Darcy. But 420, I think too much risk because who knows, they might go down that route where they go tandem ruck with Reeves. You just don't know with that sort of thing. But I think Jonas is right that Reeves can play. I think will play second fiddle to Lloyd Meek. I think because he's definitely good enough ruckman himself, Meek, to go solo in Hawthorn.
Yeah, and just quickly before we finish off, Ruck 3, have you guys got the Nick Madden from GWS?
Yeah,
Yeah.
The 102k ruck forward. Just slot him at R3 on your bench, especially if you've got Darcy Cameron. Gives you great flexibility if you've got Cameron, say you move him into the forward line and bring in another top ruckman. So yeah, Nick Madden's actually the number one pick ruckman at this stage. So there you go.
Yeah, I think we're a little bit blessed that this time we don't have to worry about paying up for a ruck forward or a swing for ruck to cover the benches, and it's just a 102 no-brainer. But knowing our luck, probably it was something I get picked round one because GWS have a mass crisis on their hands and he ends up playing or something stupid. But
If you make maybe that's all right.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, as we say, we try to keep this one a little bit shorter because there's not as much flexibility in the ruck. There's a lot of options to talk about, but I think moving forward, it's just going to be the smart move to keep it short and simple with the rucks and don't touch them and worry about them, because it's one that I think if you stuff it up, you're behind the 8 ball a fair bit, because by round 2 or 3, most higher end players definitely have the similar amount of or the similar rucks in their starting lineup. But on the flip side, I think there's a few good options this year to take a big punt on it, and you can get rewarded quite handsomely, I think. But we've got one more left in our little versus series moving forward, which will be the forwards, which will be a big talking point, I think, because there's a lot of options this year that are quite good. You have the options,
division as well.
Yeah, so you can obviously go very heavy, or you can go even very light. There's a lot of cheapies that are quite valid in picking. So we'll obviously get onto that in the next week or so, and then obviously we'll be very soon awaited our pre-round 1 teams for sure. But until then, we'll catch you guys for the forward podcast, and then we'll catch you for the next one.